when I first saw this in Next.js, I thought to myself, what in the heck is going on here? And, I quickly came to find out that this is just kind of a pattern that Next.js tends to follow. So what am I talking about here? Well, we'll get back to this file conventions here in a sec, but let's come back here. Let's just create within VS Code a very basic application here where we are just going to test conventions, create a template application here using npx create next app at latest. So I'm going to just go through these prompts here. Not a ton of this really matters if you're following along here, but just make sure you're using an app router template project here. So now that this is created, I'm going to go File, Open, and then open this within VS Code. So I have this opened up here, and okay, everything looks pretty reasonable here so far, to where I'm not seeing really any issues. But when I first was introduced to a Next.js project, it wasn't just like this simple of a project. So what we add here, and let me make sure to change this JS to JSX for icon visual appearance. And then let me create a new folder, and I'll just call this dashboard, and then create a page.js file within this folder. And then I will do export default function. We'll call it dashboard. And then I will just return an H1 that says dashboard. Very complex page. So, okay, we're starting to see the issue here. So what is the issue? Well, it's not really an issue, but if you're first seeing a Next.js app, you might see some patterns that you're not used to seeing when maybe coming from just a basic React background. So like for myself, I was used to using like create React app before moving to Next.js. And one thing I didn't see, or I definitely didn't structure my application this way, is having multiple files with the same name meaning different things. So here we have a page.jsx file, and here we have a page.jsx file. And you can see the content of these files are completely different, to where in this dashboard folder, this file is going to mean something entirely different than this page.jsx file within our root directory. And if we go npm run dev and open this up on localhost 3000, you're going to be able to see this, because in our root directory, this page.jsx, well, this is going to be our homepage. This is just going to be at localhost. But this page.jsx within our dashboard folder, well, this is going to be the page that shows at /dashboard. So here we see our homepage. And then if I go to dashboard, we see my incredibly well-styled dashboard page. So you're starting to see like Next.js, it has these different conventions. And I was really not used to this. And when I first saw a Next.js app, I was like, what is going on here? Well, this is just something that you're going to get used to with Next.js. It's really not too difficult to wrap your head around. But as it says here in their docs, Next.js has various file conventions. So let's just kind of roughly run over these real quick, just because if you're newer to Next.js, or even if you've been using Next.js for a while, like I didn't even know some of these existed until I really dived into the docs a little bit more. Let's just do an overview. So like, what's available for you for file conventions. So, you don't try to roll some of this stuff yourself, and you could have just, created a file that gave you a lot of out of the box features. So here we have a default JS. You probably won't use this a ton. This is for parallel routes, as it says here. The TLDR on this is that if you have two parallel routes, so you create parallel routes, and parallel routes are a little bit confusing, so I tend to not use them a ton for that reason in of itself. But there are use cases to where they're useful, and I do have a video on parallel routes if you want to dive into this deeper. But basically, they're rendering this at team and at analytics route in parallel here. And as you can see, the team route, it has a settings folder with a page here, but the analytics route doesn't. So you have two parallel routes with like one that has a settings and one that doesn't have a settings. So this is basically saying if you navigate to settings, the team slot will render its settings page, of course, but the analytics slot, it doesn't have a settings page. So if you do like a refresh on that settings page, the analytics slot, it doesn't have anything to render for a settings page. So a 404 will be rendered. To get around this, you can render a default.js page, and that will help kind of handle these parallel routes here. So that's kind of the way that this default JS page works. And then for air.js, this is a page that you can use that you can basically customize the Air UI that you show to a user within certain routes. So here at app/dashboard/air.tsx or JSX here, you can see, and this is a kind of a cool feature of Next.js docs that you can switch back and forth between those. That's actually pretty thoughtful. But here in the app dashboard air.js, well, this air page here, it's going to handle any errors that occur within this dashboard route. So here you're going to see you can render an air page, and air components must be client components. That's an important kind of caveat to remember here when using this convention. So you can render an air page, and it's going to accept an air prop as well as a reset prop. And then here you can attempt to recover by trying to re-render the segment by calling reset. That is what reset will do. And then you will also get the whatever error is thrown will be passed as a prop here. So you could, show that to the user, or you could log it with some sort of reporting service on Mount or something like that, like they're doing here with this use effect. So you can handle errors within your different route segments. So in this application here, I could create within this dashboard route, I could create an air. Whoa, that is not air. My fingers were misaligned on my keyboard. You could type air.js, and this file would handle all the errors that are thrown within this dashboard route. And then if I created a separate error in the root of my application, well, that would handle all errors that aren't being handled specifically within a different route. So if an error occurred in my root page, or if an error occurred in a separate route that didn't define its own error page, well, my root air.js page would handle those errors. So it's kind of a cool little file convention that allows you to customize your errors and error handling based on what route that you are in. Also, you have instrumentation.js. I honestly haven't used this one at all. It seems like it's a feature that is in experimental mode right now, but it can be used for monitoring and logging tools in your application. So you have to set experimental instrumentation hook to true here because it is an experimental feature. And then it has kind of a guide here on using instrumentation and running code and stuff. But basically it's used for monitoring and logging tools. So maybe like this might be where you use like something like Sentry.io. That's like a monitoring service that I actually really like. But this is where you can kind of set some of that stuff up. But like I said, I haven't used this a ton, but this is a file convention that you might be able to look into if you are doing some sort of monitoring solution in your application. I feel like I cannot say the word monitoring very well. And then you have a layout page. Also have videos going over this one. Basically, a layout is UI that is shared between routes. The root layout is the topmost layout in the root app directory. It is used to define the HTML and body tags. So basically, whatever you render in the root layout, that's going to show on all of your different routes and all of your different pages, because your root layout, that is going to wrap around your entire application. And then you can create layouts in specific route segments here. So you could create a dashboard layout. So that is just code that is going to be shared between all of your dashboard routes. So if you have like a dashboard settings page and a dashboard admin page, well, you might want to have the same kind of dashboard layout. Well, that's where you would create this layout.js file within a dashboard page. So I think I can show you this one real quickly. It must take a children prop here because it wraps around your pages and stuff. So you need to make sure to keep rendering your pages. But here you can see we already have a layout here. This is our root layout. It gives us this within our template. So I can just render out, let's render out something, I don't know, kind of stupid. Let's just do an H2. And you see I don't get code completion because I kept this as a JS file. But let's be cool and change it to JSX. And now I get H2 and I'll just say root layout and then save that. And then if we come back to the app here, you see I see root layout here at my homepage. But when I go to dashboard, I'm also going to see this because your root layout is going to wrap all of your pages. But now, what if I just add to dashboard here? What if I add a layout.jsx file here, and then I need to export a default function dashboard layout. It needs to accept a children prop, and then I can return. Let's do a React fragment, and then I'll do an H2 that is just going to be dashboard layout, and then make sure to render out the children as well. And then if I come back to my dashboard, you see, I see, we see, I don't know, I'm getting confused now. We see the root layout here, as well as the dashboard layout, as well as my dashboard component. So we see all the layouts here because the root layout is going to wrap around my dashboard layout, which is going to wrap around my dashboard segment. But what do you think we're going to see if I go to my homepage here? Are we still going to see this dashboard layout? Well, the answer is no, we are not, because the dashboard layout is only going to render or wrap around the dashboard route segment. So if I created another segment here, like, I don't know, maybe settings, and shouldn't be settings anything, and then I'll create a page.jsx file here, and I just do export default function settings. Well, we're building out an incredibly complex application here. Settings, and then I go to my settings page. Well, what layouts do you think we'll see here? As you probably guessed, we only see the root layout here because, like I said, the dashboard layout is only going to render or wrap around that dashboard route segment. Now, if I created nested folders here, so if I do within dashboard, if I go to like dashboard/settings, and I create a page.jsx and export default function dashboard settings, and then I return an H2 that just says dashboard settings. And then we go to, instead of just settings, we go to dashboard. We see root layout, dashboard layout. And then if I go to layout settings, we still see root layout, dashboard layout, and dashboard settings, because this layout here within the dashboard, it's still going to wrap everything within the dashboard route segment. This folder defines a route segment here. So that's kind of the gist of how layouts work. I think I have other videos on that. If not, let me know and I can definitely create some. But then we also have loading.js, which is basically a loading file that can create instant loading states built on suspense. So if you have like suspense components within a certain route segment, you can create a loading.js file that is going to change the loading experience or the loading UI, depending on what route segment is loading. So here, if you have a loading page within app/feed, well, when you're loading your feed, you could create a custom loading component for your feed that is loading. Or if you had app/settings/loading, you could create a custom component that shows while your settings page is loading. It's very similar to like using the layouts, using pages, using errors. It's just giving you some custom ability to add a loading page for different route segments and to customize things a little bit more. And then for your middleware.js, it is a file used to write middleware and run code on the server before our request is completed. So I've said this in various videos before, but middleware, it's basically software that runs in the middle of a certain process is how I like to think about it. And in this case, software that runs in the middle of a request starting or initializing and a request completing. And then based on the incoming requests, you can modify the response by rewriting, redirecting, modifying the request or response headers, or responding directly. Middleware executes before routes are rendered. It's useful for implementing custom server-side logic like auth, logging, handling redirects. You're going to use this middleware file in the root of your application and then just handle the logic that you need to do. I know we've done this several times with setting up authentication within Next.js. So this is how you can kind of set up middleware within your project by just creating a middleware.js or TS file. And then also very similar to like our error component, you can set a notfound.js file, and it's used to render UI when a notfound function is thrown within a route segment, along with serving a custom UI. Next.js will return a 200 HTTP status, code for streamed responses, and a 404 for non-streamed responses. So here is an example of a not found page, and it says good to know in addition to catching expected not found errors. So just so you know, not found is a function that you can call that you can import from, I believe it's Next navigation. So it's a function that Next gives you. So you can throw this not found error, and that's going to trigger this not found page to be rendered within your UI. And then it says this means users that visit a URL that is not handled by your app will be shown the UI exported by app/not found. So an easy way to handle kind of not found errors in your application. Any large scale application is probably going to be handling these not found errors in some case. And in Next.js, you can use a notfound.js file to do it. Page.js, we already covered this. It is UI that is unique to a route. So within our application here, you saw me adding, so this root page.js is going to be our home route. This dashboard page.js right here is going to be /dashboard. Settings page.js is going to be /settings, so on and so forth. And then you can create nested folders, and you'll definitely get the hang of this. You'll be doing this enough if you start using Next.js quite a bit. Just know that you can create folders without a page.js file in it. So I'll often create like a components folder, and I'll just store like shared UI components within this folder. And as long as you don't add a page.jsx file within a folder, it's not creating a public route. So I could create a bunch of components in this components folder, and it's not going to create a public route at /components within my application until I create this page.jsx file. And then you have route.js files. So this is how you can set up route handlers to create custom request handlers for a given route. So you can handle get, head, post, put, delete, patch, and options requests. And one thing that's good to know is they are only available inside the app directory. You do not need to use API routes like you would have to do it within the pages directory and route handlers together, as route handlers should be able to handle all use cases. So you can use this route.js file convention that allows you to export a function to handle a put request to a certain route, or a get request to a certain route, or a delete request to a certain route, so on and so forth. Now, I find that these route handlers tend to be useful for like when you're setting up authentication, or if you are, getting data from your database from a client component, you might set up an API layer within your application and set up route handlers with server components. If you can, which Next.js recommends you to do, if you can fetch data from the server, it's probably a good idea. And then, that data is going to be secure because it's server side. So you wouldn't necessarily need to set up a route handler for that, but there still are use cases to where you're going to want to use this route.js file convention. And then just a couple more here. I'm not going to cover this a whole lot, This is just going to be some configuration that you can do for these conventions. And then you also have a template.js file that is very similar to a layout file, as it wraps each child layout or page. Unlike layouts that persist across routes and maintain state, templates create a new instance for each of their children on navigation. So it's set up exactly like a layout page. And then here it says, you might use a template if features rely on use effect and use state to change the default framework behavior. For example, suspense boundaries inside layouts only show the fallback the first time the layout is loaded and not when switching pages. For templates, the fallback is shown on each navigation. So the way I think about templates is it's effectively the same thing as layouts, but if you're not able to achieve a certain effect with layouts, then you might need to reach for a template because of these other kind of features that it offers. That is a pretty quick rundown on the different file conventions in Next.js. Like I said, the first time I saw this, it was like, man, this doesn't make a ton of sense coming from just like a create React app to where you set up your own router and you have to kind of just make up your own conventions. But it is nice as you get used to this. And then every Next.js app that you see is going to follow similar conventions to this to make it pretty easy to understand other code bases as well. So hopefully this video made some sense and provided some value to you, and I will see you in that next one.